Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everybody enjoyed their lunch and a time of connecting with classmates. Thank you for joining us back here in the forum for our last session of today here at the Keller Center. The State of the School Town Hall with Dean Ethan Bueno de Mesquita. Please join me in welcoming him back to the stage.
All right. Hi again. I thought it'd be nice to do a little bit of giving you a sense of what's changed at the school since, since you were here, I guess. For those of you, I guess like a starting point for those of you who didn't graduate in the last few years, maybe the biggest and most noticeable change is the change of space. So we moved into the Keller Center about 5 years ago, and I don't know, some of you, I guess, came to the Harris School when we were across the Midway, which was before my time. I guess it was described to me last night as a one-room schoolhouse. So, and then obviously for years we were just down the block in 1155. 5 years ago we moved into the Keller Center, and I think it has been really a transformative experience for the school. I feel like the space communicates our ambitions for ourselves, our ambitions for our students, and makes this feel properly like a place where great people are coming to do great things. So it's been really a wonderful gift to be in this building. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the school and what's changed. So let's sort of start with, I think, maybe the sort of most striking fact about the school, which is the kind of decade of extraordinary growth we've experienced. So 10 years ago in 2014, we were a school of 30 some odd faculty, 300 some odd students across the professional master's degrees. There were 28 countries represented, and we had about 2,700 alumni. Today, we have 53, 54, it depends how you count, tenure track faculty members, 1,150 students in the professional master's degrees, 44 countries represented, and essentially half of our alums, more than half of our alums, have graduated from the school in the last decade. So we really have had a period of just exponential growth at the school across the board. And that was really a conscious plan that started really right around 2014, actually, when we sort of did a strategic plan and decided that the school had the opportunity to sort of massively increase its impact, the number of people that it was bringing in and offering in Harris education, the amount of research, our presence on campus, and we really made a very conscious choice to grow the school in every way, and that has led to substantial increases, obviously, in the student body, in the policy areas we study, in the size of the faculty, the kind of research, our role at the university. We are a very large presence at the university in a way that we didn't used to be, and that is really all thanks to the increased scale of the school. Happy to talk more about that, but I think it has been a great thing for us. It has presented some challenges, which I'll talk about a little bit too, but it's been a huge project, and I think overall an enormous success for us. Okay, I'll talk a little bit about what has that meant in terms of rankings. So this is I don't know, this is the reputational value of your degree or something. None of what's important about your degree is its reputational value. All of what's important about your degree is the things you learned and the people you met. So screw the U.S. News and World Report, even though they're nice to us. The U.S. News Report rankings are good, but I don't care, and we do not really in any way make decisions in order to please the U.S. News and World Report. These rankings are stupid. This ranking, on the other hand, is kind of meaningful, at least. This is a social scientific ranking that was done by Miguel Urquiola, who is the dean of the social sciences division at Columbia University and one of the leading education economists in the country. And he did a study to try and think about policy programs in policy schools in terms of the research impact of their faculty. We care a lot about the research impact of our faculty, as well as the policy impact of our students. So I am proud to say that that across the measures that he looked at, I won't go into the details, although the citation is there if you want to go read it, that across the metrics he looked at, the Harris School ranks first or second for the impact of the work of our faculty, the research work of our faculty across all policy schools in the United States. The only one that plausibly sits above us is what at the time in 2020 was still called the Wilson School, is now called the School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton, which I will note is only kind of a school unto itself. They have no actual full-time faculty at the Princeton Policy School. Those are all people who are seconded to the policy school from their department. So this is really a comparison of the Harris School to the economics and sociology and political science departments at Princeton, all put together at a school that's not the mainstay of their work. So really, we are for actual proper policy schools that have their own faculty, we are the highest research impact policy school in the country. I will also note, for a couple of reasons, that we are doing this while punching way above our weight in terms of the resources we have available to us. So compared, if you think about endowment per faculty, endowment per student, we are competing with certainly at the very top of those rankings with two schools which are far wealthier than us. We take great pride in this. This is the University of Chicago tradition. It also means, though, that we lean on our friends and our alumni quite dramatically, and I don't just mean for resources. I mean that we rely on your support for our current students. We rely on your help in thinking about our students launching their careers. We rely on your help as mentors, et cetera. We can't compete with the Kennedy School and its $1.7 billion on our own, and we deeply appreciate the work of our alumni across the country and across the world, helping our students realize their ambitions and learn what they need to learn. So thank you all. Okay, what are we doing here? I would say, we are at the beginning. So I started as interim dean a year ago and started as permanent dean like a minute and a half ago. And we are just at the very beginning process of starting to think about our next strategic plan and what our ambitions for the school are over the next 5 years. We're not there yet. But if you come back to your next, 5-year reunion, I will tell you what it turned out to be and what we did. But I do want to say we have started thinking about, I think, the mission of the school remains, I think, quite true to its original ambitions. Our mission is to serve society through our core activity, which is, evidence and analysis-based research, education, public engagement, in order to be the trainers of the policy leaders of tomorrow and a storehouse of knowledge about policy problems to help society solve hard problems. And that is what we are doing here. It is what we will always do here. We are attempting to instantiate that in everything we do here, and we are guided by a set of core principles that really, I think, help define who we are as a school, that include this commitment to rigorous analysis and evidence, that include some things we talked about this morning about institutional neutrality, about helping people learn how to think, not what to think, that include valuing a diversity of perspectives and experiences, that put intellectual integrity and honesty at the very top of our list of the most important virtues, that really center the intellectual and professional development of our students in everything we do, that really focuses on creating an educational environment in which they can become the clearest thinking, most effective policy professionals possible, and in doing everything as best as is humanly possible. So really bringing excellence to every program. One of the ways in which I believe that we compete successfully with schools that have an order of magnitude more resources than us is simply by executing better on everything we do and committing ourselves to excellence at every possible moment. And that is through the organization and is what we are here to do. Okay, let me tell you a little about all the expansion. So all the expansion has led, there's more of us, we're doing more things. It was done in a very sort of conscious way on the intellectual side. That is to say, we spent a fair bit of time when we did the strategic planning in 2014, 2015, asking ourselves, if we're gonna grow and do some new things, what makes a new thing worth doing? And at that time, the kind of answer we came to was there were a few criteria for what it meant for something to be worth doing for the Harris School. And I think the kind of 3 guiding criteria was it was an issue or an area of sufficient import to society that a great policy school should do it, that it made sense for a great policy school to have expertise in this area. It was a really, genuinely first-order important topic. 2, it was a topic where if we did it right here at this university, we would be the organizing principle on campus. That is, we worked hard to think about what are some things already going on at the university that are great, that maybe are policy relevant, but we don't need to do, and where can we pick our spots so that we can take on a larger role on campus and really lead the conversation here. So we looked for areas that were super important to society and where we felt like the University of Chicago had not yet made the kind of investment that led the university to have a great presence in that space. And then the third was areas where we thought, given our intellectual commitments, given our resources, given our intellectual style, given our own interests and existing strengths, we could be world-class at it. That we didn't want to do anything and be an also-ran. We wanted to really lead the world conversation on these topics. And so that led us to some areas, and some of them worked, some of them didn't. I'm going to tell you about the ones that worked. So let me give you just a sense of what I think of as some of the major research areas that, as a result of the expansion, we are now covering really in a world-leading way and helping to lead the conversation. So some of those investments included building up what I think is, essentially, unarguably, the best group in energy and environmental policy at any policy school in the world. So we've really made an enormous investment in this. This includes people working on issues like climate change, but not just that. We have world-leading experts in electricity markets. We have people studying the effects of various policy decisions on the extinction of animal species and the growth of animal species. We have all sorts of work going on in the energy environment space, very broadly construed. And I encourage those of you interested in that world to get to know some of those folks. We have built in the last several years a really important program on wealth inequality and intergenerational mobility, and that is really led by an institution called the Stone Center that is chaired by my colleague Stephen Durloff, who you can see there, and you can also see there's a very big picture of Stephen somewhere. Yeah, there he is. It's a little disturbing, but there's Stephen right there. I feel like he's judging me. I'm trying to say nice things. They are doing great work on thinking about wealth mobility, thinking about inequality very broadly construed, and also doing a ton of public engagement. Both, we do a lot of public events right here in the forum, run by the Stone Center. We did an amazing event earlier this year discussing affirmative action policy. We're doing an event soon on meritocracy. But they have also done a ton of work. They are now running summer schools all over the world to help people learn how to think about measuring intergenerational wealth mobility. They have formed partnerships with many of the Federal Reserve banks to do academic work and to do summer schools on wealth inequality. The Stone Center is doing great work. We have made, over the course of the last 10 or 15 years, really, an enormous investment in political economy, and in particular in the study of democratic institutions, democratic reform. The Center for Effective Government is sort of the hub of that work. For those of you who are interested in questions like state, local, and national institutional reform, should we be thinking about term limits? Should we be thinking about ranked choice voting? Should we be thinking about open primaries? Should we be thinking about filibuster reform? Should we be thinking about increasing the size of the Supreme Court, et cetera? They do a ton of work in this space, academic work, but they have also started doing a primer series. So this is edited by my colleague Anthony Fowler. We identify in each of these reform areas who we think is the most serious person in the academic literature working on this. We ask that person to think about the literature for themselves and not write a big literature review, but rather identify what is the most credible evidence that we have, what are the best theoretical arguments we have, what don't we know that we ought to know but haven't figured out yet, and write like a 3-page very accessible primer that is meant to be a resource to policymakers, to activists, to journalists who are interested in this space. They have put out, I think, about 10 of those thus far. The plan is for there to be, over the next 3 years, something like 30 of them. They are all of them available on the web. They are also available as beautiful printed objects. But they are doing a lot of work. They have partnered with the Associated Press to put those primers in every newsroom in the country to help guide the coverage of thinking about democratic reform, thinking about institutional reform. They're really doing great outward-facing work. That is a center chaired by Will Howell, who some of you may know. The center does a bunch of other important work as well. They also have a wonderful podcast called the Not Another Politics podcast, which if you're interested in politics and analysis at all, I really can't recommend to you highly enough. It's Will, Anthony, and my colleague Viola Judah, who's a deputy dean of the school. The three of them choose an issue. They identify an academic study that they think is interesting on that. One of them interviews the author. They then sort of play an edited version of that interview, and then the three of them sit around on the podcast and argue about the issue and the paper and the evidence, and they don't agree on anything. But it's very informative, and it takes sort of it's called Not Another Politics because they don't just BS about politics. They are really trying to take serious academic work and bring it to bear on a policy issue, and you can hear three very good scholars working their way through what does the scholarship have to say about the issues of the day. It's great. Okay. You heard from Chris Berry this morning, and so we have sort of a big and increasing presence in areas surrounding finance, and in particular, the Center for Municipal Finance is doing this amazing work, not just on property taxes, but on things like pensions, and on thinking about how does the market for municipal bonds affect the ability of cities to invest in infrastructure, et cetera. That is a center that Chris founded. It is now run by my colleague Justin Marlowe. The Municipal Finance Center is I think, quite obviously the nation's leading academic expert in municipal finance. They have very deep ties to the municipal finance industry, and they are leading the way in creating data products and creating research in the space that's really critical for thinking about how do cities build the infrastructure they need to build, thinking about public-private partnerships and the like. But we've expanded beyond municipal finance, so we have a big presence in public finance quite broadly, and increasingly an area of interest to our students and an area of interest to employers that we have close relationships with are things actually really in the sort of corporate finance side that have to do with impact investing, value investing, ESG type things. That world has really moved in the direction of quantifying metrics around impact, and that is a very natural space for a school with quantitative policy analytics and some finance going on. So we are now seeing a lot of students going to places like rating agencies and even to investment banks where there is an interest in impact investing. Conflict and international development. A number of years ago, we started building a group in development economics as well as in the study of things like insurgency and civil wars. That is an effort led by my colleague, Jim Robinson, and we have a sort of an enormous presence now in people working around the world on political development, on conflict resolution, on understanding when societies fall into violence and come into peace. Health policy was really a very big priority of Kate Baker's when she was the dean. She is herself a world-leading health economist, and we have hired a lot of faculty in health policy who work on things like U.S. health markets, the markets for for human capital in the U.S. health industry, as well as health insurance and the like. Health policy has become an important part of what we do here. You heard, I'll come back to tech and society in just a minute, but you heard from Leslie Turner this morning, who is a great expert in higher ed education policy. And as she pointed out, there are colleagues here, including my colleague Anjali Adukia, who works on education policy, my colleague Ariel Khalil, who works on parenting and school readiness, my colleague Jens Ludwig, who runs the education lab and works with the Chicago Public Schools. I'm thinking about public schools, primary public schooling, broadly in education policy. And public safety has become a very important part of what we do here. One of the things that happened in the last several years is that the urban labs at the University of Chicago came under the auspices of the Harris School. The urban labs are the university's kind of embedded applied research efforts. So we work very closely with government agencies, with nonprofit agencies, helping them develop and test the efficacy of various policies. There's an inequality lab, there is a crime lab, there's an education lab, and there's a health lab, and there's an energy lab. And so both the crime lab and the ed lab are working very closely with agencies like the Chicago Police Department, agencies like the Chicago Public Schools, to think about ways in which different policy strategies might be tried, tested in a rigorous way. They do a lot of randomized control trials in partnership with these agencies and try and think about the ways in which scholarship and policymaking can interact in a very immediate and direct way. And I'll just say about tech policy. Tech policy is a particular interest of mine. I do a lot of work on tech governance. I'll say a little more about this in a minute, but we have, in the last year or so, started building out the Harris policy, presence in tech policy, and that includes a bunch of different branches, including thinking about tech governance, regulation, think about content moderation, think about AI, but also thinking about the use of technology for public good. So my colleague Ariel Khalil does a lot of work testing whether various technological approaches to education readiness and the like, what their effects are on kids' performance in school. So that's kind of an ed tech application. We also have a fairly substantial presence in cyber policy, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, we got some new things going on. I just mentioned tech and society. Earlier, I talked about free expression and civil discourse, and we're working hard to build out programming in the civil discourse space. We also have some other new things going on. So we are starting to build out a presence in what it's not actually, I don't love the term, but I think it's the easiest to explain what I'm going to call ethics in public policy. And this is really thinking about not just the analytical side of what's the effect of a policy, how do I design a policy with an eye towards efficiency, but also thinking about what are the normative foundations of policy arguments? What normative assumptions am I making when I do a cost-benefit analysis? When I think about setting goals for regulating AI, what are the set of ethical and societal considerations that I need to have worked through before I come up with a technocratic solution? And how do I unpack what are the sort of normative assumptions underneath various analyses that we're already doing? So I think a lot of policy schools have sat out the normative discussion for not wanting to take a position. I don't want to take a position either, but I very much want our students to be grappling in a deep way with what the normative assumptions that underlie policy debates are, and have thought about them as carefully and rigorously as analytically as they have about how do I get to efficiency. And so we are thinking hard about how we've been building that into the curriculum over a number of years, and we're thinking hard about how we increase our presence in that space and become a leader in sort of applied philosophical discussions about policy. I'm going to talk about the Harris Policy Innovation Competition Challenge. That's a typo, the Harris Policy Innovation Challenge, in a moment. But this was a new initiative just this year in which we set teams of students to work on a local policy issue, and they did really amazing work. And then I'll talk for a minute about the student experience, student recruitment, and how we're thinking about the educational experience at the Harris School. I actually didn't ask anybody what time I'm supposed to stop. So I'm just going to keep talking until they stop me. Is that wrong? Okay, so tech policy. I've been working for a number of years on tech policy myself. It's a topic I care a lot about. I think that it's become a really first-order societal challenge for us, thinking about, if you even just think in the last few years about the societal debates we've been having around content moderation and the role of social media in our politics, or the role of social media in the spread of information in our society. I think there's very important normative debates there. There's very important policy debates there. And my own experience, I spent a lot of time talking to and advising tech companies. And my experience in that work is that when you talk policy inside a tech company, they, of course, have themselves large policy shops. And there are no people who come from a policy background in those shops. They are occupied almost entirely by either computer scientists who got tired of coding and moved over to policy, or lawyers who want to talk about compliance. And both of those are fine things to do, but that conversation is in desperate need of people who know how to think creatively and seriously about policy. And policy schools have, to my taste, sat out this conversation way too much. And I don't want us to. So I think there's a real spot for the Harris School to take a lead here and make a difference. It helps that the natural location of conversation about tech, which is at Stanford University, doesn't have a policy school. And so there is a wide open void in the conversation, and we plan on filling it. So this year we did a partnership actually jointly with with the Stanford Business School on AI and elections. So we held a couple events joint with them. We got some academics and some folks from the tech sector together to talk about AI and elections to help the academics who knew a lot about elections, but not as much as they maybe needed to about AI, to learn what the tech folks are worried about, what's feasible, what's not feasible, just get them, quickly educated on some of the basics of what's going on in the AI space. We then sent the tech people away and let the academics do some thinking. And we put out a white paper on AI and elections with some thoughts about what some of the challenges are, what some of the opportunities are, and how to think about it. You can read that white paper. It's up on the Harris website. I've done a ton of engagement over the course of this year on that topic. I think it's an exciting topic, and I think there's lots more to be done in the tech governance space, and we're working hard to have the Harris School be in a position to really help lead that conversation. As I talked about, there's a lot of work going on here sort of on tech solutions to social challenges. So if you think of things that you might have thought of naturally as policy challenges, but maybe government's moving slowly or whatever, and there are possibilities for the private sector or technological solutions to help us make some progress. So ed tech is an obvious example of that. My colleague Owendrilla Dubé is doing a bunch of work on ways in which a combination of behavioral science and tech platforms like virtual reality can help with police trainings to improve high-stress decision-making. She's been working with the Chicago Police Department on that, did a very large-scale, multiple thousands of officers. Randomized control trial is getting great results in terms of the way this training affects decision-making. There's a lot of things like that where we think that there's opportunities to pair tech with ideas about how to address social problems and maybe to pair with industry to arrive at some social solutions. And finally, Harris has had for a number of years a cyber policy initiative where we are training students, especially many of our more technical-minded students, to think about cyber policy, to think about things like cybersecurity in elections, to think about the ways in which policy and cybersecurity interact and how we can set everything from privacy policy to election security to the ways in which we conduct various kinds of national security policy and thinking about cyber policy. So it's another spot where we're working. And I think if you think about these pillars all working together, the Harris School is, I'm hoping 5 years from now when you come back, really in a central position in national discussions about tech policy, quite broadly construed. I talked about this morning, so I'm gonna just to say, this really is top of mind for us. It was top of mind for us before the last few months, and the last few months have only re-emphasized for us how important it is that the University of Chicago continue to lead on serious discussions, not just about freedom of expression, but about serious discussions about civil discourse inside the university and beyond. And we are working really hard on designing a set of programs here that build on the foundations of the Chicago tradition, but really help our students embrace a culture of having hard conversations about hard things, of speaking in a manner that invites conversation and listening in a manner that is charitable. And we're gonna work on that for the next several years. I already mentioned this, but this is just to say, right, whenever you're doing policy analysis, you either are not arriving at a policy suggestion in the end, or you are making some normative assumptions about what it is you want to achieve. There is no way, right? The phrase follow the science just doesn't mean anything unless you know where you're trying to go, right? You can't follow the science unless you have a destination. And then the science can help you figure out how to get there. But there's a thing about the destination there. And maybe we want to say sometimes in policy, that destination comes from external to the analysis, right? From elected officials, from what, great, that's true. And sometimes we want to make policy suggestions and we should be very explicit and serious-minded about what normative assumptions we're making. And that is the work, right, that goes into thinking about ethics and public policy. And we want to really bring that to the fore and unpack the normative assumptions that underlie so much of policy analysis, help our students do so, help the public discourse do so. And I think there's great research going on now if you think about things like philosophical approaches to thinking about lots of the issues there, thinking about AI, thinking about climate change. The University of Chicago is building this new institute in climate systems engineering. I don't know if you know what this is, but like the first order idea of climate systems engineering is something like maybe one of the ways of addressing climate change is spraying sulfur into the atmosphere to partially block the sun, not in like a Simpsons kind of way, I'm told. But like if you could reduce sun radiation by a little bit, maybe you could cool the planet by 1.5 degrees without reducing emissions, right? That's an interesting thought. You'd want to study it for a long time before you actually did it, although I'm told that the sulfur dissipates, so it's not forever. But also there's some very deep normative questions you'd want to ask before you go in that direction, right? And those are normative policy questions, and we want to be part of that conversation. Okay, the Policy Innovation Challenge. This is the thing we launched this year, and the idea was really just like, look, we do lots of classroom learning. We learn lots of skills, we talk about lots of policy issues, and we have a bunch of applied learning here too, right? We have the Harris Policy Labs, Chris Berry talked about one of them, where we are working on an applied policy issue, often for a client to deliver a report. But we thought it would be fun and interesting to say, outside of the classroom, let's see if we can't take those skills and put them all together to make some progress on something important and get a feeling for what it's like to do the hard work of real policy analysis and trying to come up with solutions. So we did it through a competition this year, and I think it was great. It was really a success, and I think we're going to try and do it every year. So this year, the issue we did was the Chicago public sector pension crisis. So I don't know how many of you follow the always riveting world of public sector pensions, but the city of Chicago has putting aside the teacher's pension, which is a whole other problem, has a $35 billion gap in its pension funding. That's something like $10,000 to $15,000 per resident. And that's a massive improvement from 10 years ago. Both the Emanuel and the Lightfoot administrations made some substantial progress on this. So we put to our students a challenge to learn about and think about the underfunded public sector pension problem and come up with solutions which were supposed to both be well supported in terms of the evidence, good technocratic ways of approaching this problem, and also to have an argument and analysis about their political feasibility. They were to take seriously both coming up with a solution and coming up with a solution that someone might be willing to consider doing. We had 50, 60 students participate in teams of 4 or 5. It was quite a rigorous experience and time commitment. So there was a bi-weekly seminar, that lasted for 2 quarters. So this was essentially like taking another class on top of their coursework, in which people came in and taught them how to think like an actuary, and what are the politics of public sector unions, and et cetera. So they really heard from experts from around the city. This was led by the director of the Center for Municipal Finance, who is himself quite an expert in this area. So they went through this seminar and they learned a whole bunch of technical skills. Many of them knew essentially nothing about how pensions work at the time. I know that's hard to believe, since most people spend their time learning how pensions work. So they went through this this seminar, this class really, in learning public finance, local public finance, and how to think about pensions. They each had a mentor, I think almost all of whom are Harris alums who are now working professionals in the public finance space, who helped them both with their analysis as well as thinking about the professionalization of their presentations, et cetera. They put together proposals which were submitted to an expert panel of judges. 3 finalists were selected. We had a pitch event right here. The stage was bigger. But we had a pitch event for the 3 finalist teams. The judges were all here. The room was full. We had tremendous, as you can see here, we actually got tremendous public engagement from this. The city of Chicago turned out to be really excited that the Harris School and the University of Chicago were working hard on a local issue. This is something we hadn't fully anticipated when we chose the issue. We kind of chose it because we thought it was a good topic, but it turns out like the city really wants us to engage with the city, and the civic society of the city of Chicago is very happy when the University of Chicago engages. And so the press were here, the civic organizations were here, the business community was here to hear the pitches, and then the winning team got a ton of press coverage, in part because one of their suggestions was, in fact, controversial, and they got beaten up a little bit in the press, which was, I think, fun and exciting for them. All 3 of the winning teams were invited to publish op-eds in Cranes. I know that the winning team is presenting, I believe, at the Civic Federation this week. It's been just great. It was like They had a great experience. They did incredible work, and they've gotten so much recognition. It's really been a wonderful thing. And so we're going to do it again next year, topic pending, but I'll let you know when we know. I have an idea. Finally, I just want to talk for a minute about the student experience. I think the growth of the school has been overwhelmingly positive for the experience of our students. We offer so much more here than we did a decade or 2 decades ago, in terms of the services we can provide for students, in terms of the professionalization of the school, in terms of the topics and policy areas we cover, in terms of the events we can do. I just think operating at this scale provides all sorts of opportunity for our students. That said, it is not, without trade-offs. And I think, to me, when I look around the school and think about my experience in the classroom, et cetera, to me, the big trade-off that we've experienced thus far is that when you operate at 500, 600 students a year instead of 100 students a year, the whole thing is just a little less intimate. Not everybody knows each other in the same way. The students maybe don't quite have as close a relationship with faculty members as they did when we were at a much smaller size. And so we were starting to think about, okay, now that we've gotten to this size, and now that we have figured out how to operate a school at this size, which was not easy work, what do we do to recapture some of the intimacy and some of the connection of a 100-person-a-year school at our new size? And that's some work, but I don't think it's rocket science. And so one of the things we're starting to think about in this space is what I, at least in my head, think of as a cohort model. So when you get here, and especially I think in your second year or by the spring of your first year, you maybe have a pretty good sense of what's the policy area that motivates you, what are your professional ambitions, et cetera. And I think you could imagine a model in which there's 20 or 30 students a year who want to do energy and environment policy. There's 20 or 30 students a year who want to do education policy. They're from all over the world, right? But they have a set of shared professional ambitions, a set of shared policy passions, a set of shared intellectual interests, and they should be going through graduate school together in a real sense. And so you could imagine creating an experience which is, let's take all of the energy policy students, they're going to go through a series of classes together, but also, right, once they've identified themselves, we're going to place them in research opportunities in the energy and environment labs. And we're going to have a lunch for them with one of the energy and environment faculty every quarter so that, they're not going to get to know every faculty member well, but they're going to leave here with 2 or 3 who they've really gotten to know a bit. They've worked in their lab, they've had some meals with them, they've talked some policy with them. That also creates an opportunity once you've identified those students, look, maybe there's a set of professional skills that students in that world need that students in education policy need different ones. And you can target, right? You can target professional development, you can target career placement, you can do all sorts of things to create a kind of school within school model in lots of different areas. And whether that's all of those are a policy area, or maybe some of them are a group of students who say, my plan is to go into consulting, right? I want to do public sector facing consulting. It's not a policy area, it's a profession. And maybe there's 30 of those. We're starting to think along these lines. We're going to figure that out. But I think we believe we're doing a really good job on providing lots of opportunities, and we believe we are teaching really good classes, and we believe we're doing lots of good things on things like student engagement and career placement, whatever, but we want to bring some coherence and some intimacy to that. And so that's kind of the next step that we're thinking about in the student experience. The other thing we're thinking about very hard is how we make sure that the Harris School is the place that the very best policy students and future policy leaders come and want to come. And so we are trying to think about making as transparent to people as possible that this is the place they should come for their policy education. And one of the things that involves, I think, is just kind of increased awareness and creating natural flows of pipelines of people into the school. The world has become more competitive. There are other policy programs, but there are also data analytics programs and what have you. And we're trying to make sure that we are staying top of mind. And 2 of the ways that we are thinking about that are these 2 things at the bottom. So I'll actually start with the second one, which is this idea about a feeder school initiative. We're not quite there yet, but this is really modeled on something that the University of Chicago has started, which is the 4+1 and 4+2 program. So if you're an undergraduate student in the college, in your sophomore year, your junior year, you can apply to this 4+1 program where you are now guaranteed admission to the graduate program after graduating. And now you can do whatever you want as an undergraduate major. You no longer need to, like, you don't have to think like, oh, I want to go to this graduate program. Let me make sure I tailor my courses to get in there. You can say like, you know what, I really want to be, I want to major in ancient Greek, but I also want to go to policy school when I'm done. Let me get in, and now I can concentrate on ancient Greek. I'm going to learn statistics and economics later, right? So one of the things we're trying to think about doing is identify other schools that don't have a policy school, small liberal arts colleges, some of the historically black colleges and universities that don't have a professional school, and who we want to be the place where they naturally go to policy school. And so we were thinking about a model that looks like, look, we'll tell you 2 or 3 courses that we think prepare a student for a Harris education. Right? Your students take those courses and do, make an A- in them, get a good letter from a faculty member, and we are here for you now. Like with a very short application, you don't have to take the GREs, you don't have to pay a fee, whatever. You've taken these courses, you're from one of our feeder schools, we want you here. Yeah, we know you're ready for the course. So we're trying to start thinking about that, ways of making ourselves maximally accessible to students we know we want. The other thing that we are getting ready to do is to make sure that people know that they can afford to come here. We do a ton of financial aid to students. We want people to come here. We want an education here to be accessible. So one of the things we are starting to think about is simply making an across-the-board commitment to anybody who's put in at least 3 years of public sector work in the United States, at the state level, the local level, the federal level, in the military, of sort of, a guaranteed high level of financial aid, of loan-free financial aid, so that they know that although the sticker price may look high, they can afford to come here, and that we want them here, that we are committed to training people who are committed to doing public service. So we're getting ready to roll out a whole series of things that help us recruit the students who should be here and who deserve a Harris education, and to make sure that they know that the University of Chicago is a place for them. And that's a very serious commitment of ours that we want to make sure happens. So I'm going to stop there. Happy to take questions, talk about the school, whatever you like.
Hi, thank you, Dean, for that presentation. I wanted to ask, I really love the idea of the feeder school initiative, but as a student that when I was here did not live in Chicago before and did not live in Chicago afterward, I found it difficult to find a feeder career in my state from the University of Chicago. So to what extent is the university trying to build out, as the classes grow larger and you have to accommodate more students, more of those feeder employers who are looking for people from the University of Chicago, but may not necessarily be located in Chicago and not reflexively know the reputation that the school has for great public policy?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll say a couple things. Career placement from a policy school is an interesting challenge. It differs. We talked a lot to our colleagues when we've been thinking about this issue. We talked a lot to our colleagues from the business school, who I think do career placement amazingly well. But one of the things we discovered is that their graduates go into like 3 fields, and it's super easy for them to think about, there's a set of partnerships with consultants, there's a set of partnerships with investment banks, there's this very defined set of paths. That makes career placement very straightforward in a way that's not true for us. Students from the Harris School go into an enormous number of professions to an enormous number of employers, and so the model has to be a little bit different for us. That said, we have, I don't know when you graduated. 2019. So we have been working hard to build out career placement, both on the career readiness, sort of career coaching side, but also we have a team now of employer relations professionals whose job is to build relationships with employers all over really the world, and educate them about what a policy degree is and what set of skills that comes with. We are working really hard on building out that capacity. We are also relying a lot on our network of alumni. One of the things that you'll maybe recall from my very early slide, maybe my favorite, yeah, right, is like over half of Harris alums have graduated in the last decade. And that means that we have this enormous growing capacity of alums to help our students find their way into careers, both as mentors, but also as employers. And so we believe that as you all, the alumni, especially the alumni of the last 5-10 years, grow in your careers, we are hoping and counting on your being a big part of the pathway of helping our students find their ways into their careers. I'll also just say that my colleague Crescinda is sitting here. She's just taken over the career services office, but she's doing amazing work, and we're going to do great things in this space. But we are aware this is a very, we have an obligation to our students to prepare them for their careers, not just by learning statistics, but by being ready for job interviews and by putting them in front of employers who understand the value of the degree. And we're working really hard at it. And we're working really hard on partnering with our alums. And so if you are an alum in a career that you think Harris students might want to go to, we welcome your outreach. We will put you to work, and we will seek your expertise.
Hello. How are you? I have a question. So going to the endowment information, what are kind of the ideas and the plans around possibly growing that endowment? I understand, punching above your pay grade is quite impressive, honestly, but also just for long-term growth and just understanding some of the headlines that have come out about UChicago's finances in general in the last year. I'd just like to hear about, what are the ideas for development in that space, what they're thinking about, again, so that we can create that sustainability for the Harris School.
Absolutely. So Rena, our head of development, is looking at me to see if I give a good answer. We're going to see. This is a test. If I give a bad answer, she'll give me a good one later for next time. No, look, obviously we need to increase the university can punch above its weight, but also we need to compete. And I think most especially what that means is the place where we most acutely feel our resources relative to our competitors is our ability to compete on financial aid and make sure that we're accessible to the students we want to be accessible to. So it's just a first order priority. So the university is going to enter a new campaign soon, and we are going to be highly focused on fundraising. We think that we are doing a lot of things here that should be appealing not only to alumni of the university and traditional supporters of the university, but to people who care deeply about social problems, who care deeply about policy issues. And we are very actively out there in the world saying to the people who already love us, introduce us to your friends who don't know us yet, but who are going to love us when they get to know us. We think policy schools especially really do have a story to tell about what our alums and our students are doing and about the research we're doing that should be appealing and that people who care about societal challenges should want to fund. So, honestly, the answer is we just have to go raise a lot of money from people who should want to support our work, and we're going to be on the road a lot doing it. That's how it works. We also are, I'll say, as a school, we have thought about alternative sources of revenue that help us to compete. So we are doing a lot more than we ever did before in terms of things like executive education. We do it in our own particular idiom. A lot of executive education, I don't know, I'm being filmed. I don't know what I can say. A lot of executive education done by other universities, it seems to me, is not always in keeping with their intellectual standards. They run executive ed by using their brand name and then doing kind of networking activities and putting a famous person up there, and then people feel, I don't know. It's not my thing. When we do exec ed out of the Harris School, we do it in exactly the same way we do education. That is to say, we only do things that we believe in intellectually. And so the kind of exec ed we are out there doing is it turns out all over the world, there is demand for government bureaucratic agencies, for the private sector, et cetera, for people who want to learn how to do cost-benefit analysis, for people who want to learn some microeconomics, from people who, even, I know those of you who've taken my class will be even some people who want to learn a little bit of game theory. And so we are working hard to identify who those people are, where we can go and do things which are not just our traditional kind of teaching, but are deeply in keeping with our mission and our intellectual values. So we're also thinking about revenue from a variety of angles. But there's just no question that we're gonna work hard on fundraising, and that's absolutely essential to making a university run and to making this school run.
Up here in the back. I'll attempt to multitask here. Sarah, I'm a class of 14 grad. You started out the presentation really talking about the academic reputation of Harris, which Chicago as a large institution echoes about some of your colleagues and intellectual leaders. But I wonder if you could elaborate on the story that you just you talked about the story that we tell through our alumni, bridging that sometimes disconnect between research and applied when people are going out and trying to sell this to political leaders, trying to implement policies that may not make sense in research, but is how it gets done, how you train students for that. And as we have this, huge alumni network, how we add to what the Harris reputation is not just a research intellectual powerhouse, but we actually get stuff done.
Yeah, so I couldn't agree more. I mean, you're definitely singing my tune when you say it's not just beautiful policy ideas, you got to think about the politics. So I'll just say a couple things. In terms of what we're doing, I'll talk internally first. In terms of what we're doing internally to think about not just kind of like the ivory tower ideas, but more applied work, we really, I think that we have been and are ramping up our efforts to really make the centers I can't believe I'm going to say this sentence out loud, the center of that activity. That's just awful. Well, I'll revise that for the next time. The center's the locus of that? I don't know. It's terrible. But so, I think the exemplar of this is the urban labs, which are run by really first-rate academic researchers at the top of their game, but which are doing, they're not just doing the studies. They are really, really hands dirty in the weeds of policy change. They are working very closely with policymakers, with civic society. They have, a staff of people who are not academics in the way of a real organization trying to do the work. So I think they're the sort of the top of the heap of that. But the academic centers too. If I think about the Center for Effective Government, I think the talk you heard, those of you who are here, from Chris Berry about the work the Center for Municipal Finance did, which started with Chris doing, academic work on figuring out how to think about modeling tax assessments, but turned into a Harris Policy Lab with students doing work, turned into deep political engagement. I mean, Chris didn't say it, but along with that Chicago Tribune writer, Chris really brought down the president of the Cook County Democratic Party, who was behaving in a corrupt and irresponsible way, by showing that. Those students were deeply engaged in both some serious intellectual work and some hands-on policy work that changed the world. And I think we see that in lots of the centers. So Ariel Khalil's Behavioral Insights and Parenting Lab partners very deeply with the Chicago Public Schools on helping under-resourced parents in under-resourced communities adopt various strategies for getting their kids ready for kindergarten. So there's a bunch of work that gives students the opportunity not only to engage in research and intellectual work, but get their hands dirty with work in the community and policy change. So that's, I think, a big part of what we're doing internally is just trying to give our students opportunities to do work that we think is intellectually serious, but also gives them real exposure to policy change and policy work. And then there's telling the story of the school through our alumni, which is, I think, a not trivial part of our communication strategy. We feature alumni a lot in our communications and our website, et cetera, but we also bring our alumni back here a lot to help our students learn what it means to be doing the work away from the Harris School. So that is like to help them contextualize, here's what you're learning here, here's what it's like out there, here are the connection points and here are the disconnection points. So, that looks like the mentor program, that looks like bringing in alumni to be the coaches for the policy innovation challenge. That looks like this stage and this space is constantly filled by alumni panels, talking to our students. There's lots of things like that.
I was class of 2014, and I think a lot of the gaps that it sounds like maybe the administration is starting to fill in terms of real-world experience and connecting with other students interested in your similar policy area and finding mentors in the field were at the time filled by the student organizations. Can you talk a little bit about the current state of and support for the student orgs?
Sure. I mean, I think the student orgs are robust. They are outspoken. So I guess I'm not sure much has changed. I mean, I think the student organizations remain they remain the organizing principle of the sort of non-curricular part of the student experience. We have a substantial staff whose job really is just the student engagement side, not the academic affairs side, but like a staff dedicated to supporting student engagement. And those student organizations run the gamut from kind of identity groups, policy interest groups, community engagement groups. Like there's a whole range. I think students are pretty free to pursue things they want. I think student organizations remain robust and an important part of life here. And honestly, like also part of how we think about professional development. Like there's things that career services can do for students, and there's also things that students can self-organize and do for themselves. And so they do things like, within a particular sort of set of professional ambitions, if there's a set of skills you need to know to interview for those jobs, we can do some of that. And they also have student organizations who help themselves do it together. And so there's no way we can do everything for them, and I think we are encouraging of student organizations continuing to fill those gaps. All right.
Oh, wait,
Wait, oh, no, we take it back.
Sorry, I know.
There's one in every crowd.
I know, everyone's about to leave. Apologies. I'm curious to know, and this might be more on the alumni development side, but as you mentioned, about half of our alumni network has graduated within the past 10 years. And we were a class of 2019. When I graduated, I felt like there was a really strong alumni network in Chicago and Chicago opportunities, but other cities, it maybe wasn't as robust. So I would love to know, whether it be San Francisco, Washington, D.C., Houston, wherever in the world, what's kind of the university's trajectory on trying to strengthen the alumni networks in these other cities where policymakers and policy is happening is very important.
So we do have alumni organizations in lots of cities, and the alumni relations team does travel around and meet with them and try and build community. Obviously, Chicago is, here we are. It's big. But I mean, I was just in DC. When was I in DC? Last week. I was just in DC last week. I don't know, I had dinner with 20, we got a lot of alums in DC. Obviously I had dinner with a lovely group of alums, and we have a big group out in the Bay Area. We are out in the Bay Area a lot, and we've got a very active group of very supportive alums in the Bay Area. We just had folks who were just out in Mexico City, where we have a very active group of alums. Yeah, so I think we view, as I've said multiple times, like we view our alums as both our responsibility and as an enormous resource. And so I don't, if there's pockets of alums in places who want us to come visit and help build that community, you should let us know. We'll come. So thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.